So I'm Jess Greenberg. I am one of the moderators and coordinators for BigBlueButtonWorld this year, and I will be introducing our guest today and moderating the Q&A at the end. So this is session 2 for today. Today focuses on developers, and I'm very pleased to welcome Anton Georgiev. Anton is a project manager. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words today. Anton is a project manager with Blindside Networks, and today he will be speaking about getting started with developing on BigBlueButton. Welcome, Anton.
Thank you, Jess. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you here. This is the second session for today, and the topic is getting started with developing on BigBlueButton. And first of all, in retrospect, 2020 and the beginning of 2021 have been very different from the previous years of BigBlueButton, mostly in a positive way. And when I was thinking about the role that contributors play in BigBlueButton, I was curious how many of the contributors since 2020 have been participants from the external community versus the people who are from the companies behind BigBlueButton, the official companies who offer hosting. And so I checked on GitHub, and out of the 47 code contributors, 22 have been from the community. So this means that quite a few of the main features have actually been contributed by the community. For example, the faster recording processing, some row of the scaling of significant role in scaling of HTML5 client, and also great contribution for using configuration from ATC BigBlueButton. Also, quite a few changes on the whiteboard, and contributions to polling, and many more. And of course, community contributions don't end with pull requests, with features. We are very happy to see that contributors are helping with issues on GitHub, specifically commenting, helping people resolve problems. We see great responses in the mailing lists, and when I look at threads, quite a few helpful comments have been contributed by external contributors.
We can't hear your audio at the moment, Anton.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
And specifically, the tremendous effort on testing and providing feedback for BigBlueButton 2.3. It was a great push in the end of April this year and beginning of May. So thank you, everyone. Today, we're going to go through a few items that will help anybody who would like to contribute with BigBlueButton in terms of development. So first of all, we'll go through steps to ensure we have a BigBlueButton server that is working optimally. Then we'll go through how to add the development environment on the server. We'll go through some architecture information so everybody understands the flow of events. And then we'll go through some key commands to be able to start and stop services and check logs. We'll go through the files that are key for being able to make changes and deploy these changes. We'll show how to double check if the changes we're making are actually successful. We will list some resources to help you make sure that you have all the links to help in case you're struggling with development, and in case you have questions or would like to discuss what you're doing. Some instructions on deploying the changes so that you can actually start using in production the modifications. And also, we'll go through some reasons to share your work with the community and how exactly to do that. In the end, we'll show about different ways of contributing to BigBlueButton, and there will be a short demo of making a simple change and deploying it. So first of all, how do we get a working BigBlueButton server? There is a simple way to do that using the BBB install script that has been around for about a year and a half. And I've added a link to BBB install. It pretty much the guarantees that in 30 minutes you have a working BigBlueButton server if you have a server with public IP. But some alternatives to do that on development environment are using a virtual machine. You can always just spin up a DigitalOcean droplet or alternatively EC2 instance and install BigBlueButton there. But there is also another option that is pretty new. And thanks to Tiago Jacobs from IMDT, who's here in the meeting, this is a Docker container that is running locally. We'll go through some information about Docker dev, how to add it to your environment. This is the preferred way that I've been using in the last month or two, and I'm very happy. I typically would use a DigitalOcean instance before that so that I could use my Android devices to test the client. But using Docker dev is actually much easier for me, and I'm able to use my local IDE to make changes. So this is definitely my preferred method of developing right now. So once we have a working BigBlueButton server, the next step is to actually set up development environment. And the documentation for that has been recently updated. We don't really need to set up a development environment for every single component that BigBlueButton contains. We only need to have the environment for the components that we're planning on modifying. So in the general case, this includes HTML5 client, sometimes Akka apps, and I can't really remember the last time that I've worked on Akka FACSL. So when I set up a development environment, I don't even go through these steps for Akka FACSL. So the steps have been recently updated for 2.3, and I have some resources further in the presentation for questions and answers, so mailing lists and the GitHub issues. And if you hit any trouble with actually setting up the environment for any of these, please let us know. But earlier today, I followed the instructions for 2.3, and I set up HTML5. That environment, it worked like a charm. And in the end of this session, we'll be using that same environment to make a change and deploy HTML5 client. When I mentioned that you only need to set up components that you're planning on modifying, well, how do you actually know which components you need? So this is the architecture overview diagram of BigBlueButton, and here you can see HTML5 client. This is AK apps, AKFS CSL, BB-Web from the previous slide. And the main thing that you need to know about BigBlueButton is that it's based on sending events. It's an event messaging system, and the events are sent through Redis PubSub as a messaging bus. In terms of media components, we use Currento for webcams, for screen share, and for listen-only audio. And we use FreeSwitch for the audio, the microphone, and the mixing, also for dial-in. Redis is not only used for PubSub, Redis is also used to save the events in case the meeting is supposed to be recorded. So all the relevant events to be able to reproduce the meeting are also saved to Redis, and the recording service uses them. Presentation conversion and API calls are handled from BB-Web. So when you want to change something just visually, only HTML5 client, maybe HTML5 server will need to be modified. If you're also adding some logic change, most of the logic is in AK apps. So you'll be setting up an environment for AK apps and for HTML5. Here I have the answer of a question that's very commonly asked about how do events actually get propagated to clients. And I've had this question quite a few times. For example, what's the role of MongoDB? And let's say an event that says that a poll has been started is coming from AK apps on the Redis bus. So we have a Redis class on HTML5 server, and the event is picked up in Redis class. It's in the events handler. It's directed to the handler for polling started. We have a modifier that is later used, and we set this poll in the collection. So when a client connects to the server, there is a subscription for polling, and that poll is obtaining a subset of the poll collection, only depending on the meeting ID and the information that that specific user is supposed to know. So the role of MongoDB is to synchronize data between the server and each of the client, and to actually filter which data is supposed to be known by each of the clients. So we have the poll started event, and each of the clients has the poll open. So the moment the user hits on which option they would like to vote with, there is another event that's being triggered from the client using a Meteor method called publish vote, and that event is triggering a Meteor method handler on the server side. So we publish the information back to Redis, where it gets to AK apps, and changes are made to the meeting state. And on the client, we actually only provide data that has been already gone through AK apps, so that in confirmation type of events. So after a user votes, the information will go through AK apps, and the confirmation for the vote will be propagated only to the presenter. So that's how the presenter would know that the user has voted. So in terms of how to start and stop services, there are several commands that are quite useful, and it's not very easy to spot them when you're first starting. So I would like to just list the the ones that I use every day and that are helpful for me specifically. So most of them have to do with BBconf, which is a utility for checking different details on the BigBlueButton system. So all of them can be run with sudo. So sudo bbconf check troubleshoots the system. It displays warnings if there is something misconfigured, but in the most common use, it actually displays the version that you're running, so it can help you not just troubleshoot, but it will display the version, whether you're on BigBlueButton 2.3, which specific client build you're on, and so on. bbconf status, we'll be using this later in the session. It lists all the services and it shows if they're active or not. So in our case, we'll be checking on when we're deploying HTML5 client, we'll be making sure that the activity, the service, the default service is stopped. And then we'll be running our own development environment service. And then when we want to deploy, we'll make sure that the service is running again, just to check that our deployment has worked. bbconf salt is the next one. And the main use of that command has been that it provides a direct link for API mate, which is used to create sessions, join them with different roles. We'll be using that command later today as well. And with systemctl, you can start, stop, restart, reload services, and so on. In terms of finding logs, we use journalctl, and this is a command that I use quite often. And essentially, it provides all the logs from the HTML5 client, and then you can do grepping. You can search for mentions of different keywords. So where to find the key files? There is a link on the docs for where all the configuration files are located. And as of version 2.3, all the files that are overriding these configuration files, but also in GitHub, you can see that in the main repository that all the components are listed with their name from the architecture diagram. And just to, as a general helpful command, when I try to look for when I try to look for the location of specific files, oftentimes I just grab for keywords. So here I search for polls in the HTML5 client directory, and I can see directly linked all the files. So UI components is client-side files, API polls is related to the server side, the metas, the handlers, modifiers, so updating collections. Once we make a change, we would like to verify that the change has taken effect and it's indeed accomplishing everything we want. So the main tool that we use for this is called API Mate. And as I was mentioning, you can obtain this link through the bbconf salt command. We'll be using that in the demo as well. So some key resources that will help you get started with development and will be also key for your work as a BigBlueButton contributor. So our repository is hosted on GitHub, and in the BigBlueButton bucket, there is much more than just the BigBlueButton source code. Also, the BB install is hosted on GitHub in the same BigBlueButton group with the source code for BBB. The documents are located on docs.BigBlueButton.org, and here you can find steps for how to install if you want to do alternative installation compared to BB install. You can find all these steps for the dev environment setup, for different administration activities, frequently asked questions, how to customize your configuration, and so on. These are updated quite frequently, and now that we have 2.3 running and 2.4 running in production and 2.4 being developed, we have updated the docs to contain information about both of those releases. The next useful link that I have here is the developers mailing list, and pretty much all the discussions that have to do with a new release, reporting of issues, asking for how to make changes to the client or to other components take place in this mailing list. So that's a great place to make sure you have subscribed and you're able to post answers to other people's questions or just to ask your own questions. And of course, BigBlueButton is based on quite a few different pieces of software. So you may want to get familiar with the documentation for Meteor, for React.js, for Akka, Scala, WebRTC, and so on. But given that that's quite the list, and some of them are not really that common for developers, I would say that you would want to get some basic understanding of how things work for BigBlueButton, and really focus on React.js and Meteor if you want to do client-side work, or only use Scala, Java if you're doing backend. So in terms of deploying to productions, there are two different options. On the documentation page, we have added instructions how to deploy each of the components. For example, this is a screenshot for the BB web instructions. And you can see that we compile all the resources, possibly after your changes, in a WAR file, then copy it. This could be a SCP command to another server, and just expand the archive, and you're able to replace BB web that was originally running with your custom one. Similar instructions are available for the other components, but there is a different method that we would like to adopt, and there is already work underway, thanks to quite a few key members of the extended BigBlueButton community, and that work is on having open source packaging, so that after you make your changes, you can just rerun the packaging scripts and create the Debian packages that you would need to install on your server. So this would be to replace the packages that come by default with BigBlueButton. So after you make all these changes and you're happy with the result, the next step could be to share your work with the community. And the best way to do that is with a pull request. If you're not sure if your work is complete, you can open it as a draft pull request. This is just a sample pull request from earlier this year by Hero. Thank you, Hero, for all the work that you've been doing for BigBlueButton. Quite a few contributions to the whiteboard, different scenarios that are useful for instructors. And we have a pull request template, so make sure to follow that. Once the pull request is open, other members will be able to see the changes, will be able to provide feedback, and so forth. Of course, there is different ways to contribute, not just with opening pull request. So there is also quite a few reasons why you would want to consider contributing the changes that you're making on BigBlueButton. So one reason is to help others. If you've been helped, it would be great to have the chance to help others. Also, it improves the product. BigBlueButton is one of the main strengths in BigBlueButton is the open source community that supports it. And by sharing your work, it also provides, it gives you a chance to hear feedback from other community members. So, for example, you might be missing a key case that you just didn't think of, but someone else who's familiar with the code can point you out. Also, another key reason that you might consider contributing is that if your code is actually merged into the product, next time that you're upgrading BigBlueButton, you won't need to make these changes on your own on top of the changed BigBlueButton. They'll already be there. So how can you contribute? Other than sending pull requests, you can also comment on issues that are open or even issues that are closed if you have more info or if they're recurring. You could provide feedback on pull requests, especially if you have tested these pull requests locally. You can suggest ways to improve the code base or the product in general. For example, you can suggest an enhancement that others haven't thought about. You can also help with the effort on documentation of BigBlueButton, the installation, the development, environment, and configuration. You can help with the testing effort, and you can always report the issues if you encounter any issues. We're really happy when we see that an issue that's been escaping us for a while is now there is now a comment with detailed steps how to reproduce. It's really helping us, and we are really hoping to be able to work closely with all the BigBlueButton developers out there. We have about 6,000 forks on BigBlueButton last time I checked. So even though quite a few people are already helping with pull requests, I'm sure that there are others who have worked on BigBlueButton, and there are cases that there are modifications that they've done that would be useful to the general community. So I mentioned Docker Dev earlier in the session, and this is the alternative way of setting up a local BigBlueButton server. And Tiago is here in this session, so I'll provide some basic info, but if you have more info, if you're looking for more information, Tiago will be able to answer any questions. The instructions for how to use Docker Dev are also on GitHub. It's a separate project in the BigBlueButton bucket. And the idea is that you install use a Docker image, and you set up self-signed certificates. These certificates will allow you to use media, so you'll be able to use microphone, webcam, and so on this local environment. But the server will not be accessible from the outside. So you'll be able to import these certificates in your browser. So the browser recognizes and allows for WebRTC media, but that won't be accessible, let's say, from your mobile device. Still, it's an awesome way to get started with developing on BigBlueButton. It's local, it's on your computer, there are no additional costs. And it's really fast and easy to make changes to the files and have the services run locally. So we'll do a very short change to HTML5 code. We'll deploy locally, and after that, it will be time if you'd like to have any questions answered. So I'm sharing my screen now, and so just a moment. I'm using the Docker dev that I have installed here locally, and this is just the HTML5 client running. And in terms of sample change, there is, in the About dialog, there is the client build number that is typically set at the packaging step. But if you're running from source, you only see this HTML5 client version. And in terms of sample change, I was thinking that we could modify this and rerun the client in a dev environment. So we can confirm that this is modified, and then we can deploy this change so that the client would still be running with as a service, but the change will be visible. So the changes would be deployed. So great way to find where to edit in the HTML5 code is just to search for a visible string. So on the left, I have the editor with HTML5 client code setup. And so I ran this previously. We have this HTML5 client string in the settings YAML file, and we see that this value is mapped to HTML5 client build key. So when we search for that key, we see that in the About component on client side, this value is used. So what we could do is just modify this. Say instead of having that string, we can have BBBWorld, and we save it. So on the right, I have the service running, and I'm going to just demonstrate that this is indeed the service. We'll be using the bbconf status command. If I can find my terminal, of course. So in the container, we can see that the HTML5 client is running as a service. So we're going to use one of the other commands. So this was sudo systemctl stop bbhtml5. And essentially that stops the HTML5 client. I have, so I'm here at the HTML5 client folder. So if I run npm start, this is going to use Meteor to run the HTML5 client instead of having the service. So this is going to start in a moment, and we'll confirm that the change indeed is has been made. So the HTML5 client is now running in a dev environment, and I found this. So in the browser, I have the API made page, and the link was found through the bvconf salt command. So I'm able to create a meeting and join. So when I create a meeting, I see that there are logs being added in the Meteor process. I'm able to join as a moderator, and here I see BVWorld indeed. We're running the code that we modified. So I'm going to end this meeting, and in order to deploy the HTML5 client, I'll be using a script called deploy to user share. So what this is going to do is going to use the source code, and is going to compile an archive and then deploy to override all the HTML5 related files that are used in production. Make sure to read the script before you run it if you're doing that on your environment. So what's going to happen now is in a minute or two, we'll have the service for HTML5 running, and we'll be seeing this process as active. But when we go to the client, we'll see BVWorld as the build. Okay, so this is going to take a minute or two. So I think I could answer a question or two before I share before I join the client to display that the change has taken effect.
Okay, great. There's a question in the chat that asks, have you found any nice tools to analyze GitHub repositories to understand where the contributions come from or who the community is?
I'm not familiar with any. Maybe you could share such example. I use git blame to see who has made the change. For example, when I click on the about container, I can see that Taina Felipe was the last one to modify this line. And in general, I looked through pull requests quite a lot, but I'm not. It's not coming to mind. The tool that you're referring to is not really coming to mind right now. I'll be happy if you recommend such a tool.
Okay, another question from Wade. Wade wants to know if it would work in WSL2.
WSL2. I'm not exactly sure if anybody is able to answer that in the public chat. That would be nice.
Okay, let me check the YouTube live to see if there's any questions over there.
Okay, so Windows subsystem for Linux. And I have not tried this, but that's a great question to ask in the mailing list for the developers. So I'm going to navigate. Actually, in the end, I can have the page with all the resources displayed so that the link is visible.
Awesome. And there's also a question from Daniel. And Daniel asks, is there any good introduction to Akka and Scala? It seems to be quite different from usual programming languages.
There are quite a few courses and books. Both of them have been around for years. I know that when I was working on Akka apps, maybe 5-6 years ago, I went through a book, and it was quite useful. I'm not very familiar with the latest courses. I know that people follow some, so again, that would be a great question for the mailing list. I know that Manning editing house has at least 3 books related to Scala and Akka, and the ones I've checked are superb. I think that's what I can answer for that question.
Okay. And then just so everyone knows, Fred just put a link in the chat for the next session, which will be starting at 12:30. We're going to be staying here until this session is over and any questions are answered. But if you were interested in hearing about the BigBlueButton media stack, that will be starting in 2 minutes. And Fred Dixon put the link to that room in the chat.